First of all, it's an absolute honour and privilege to be here today and standing in front of all of you. But more so an honour and privilege, I think, to have listened and talked over the last 2 days. I think that's been something that's so special, and as we talked about yesterday, I think it was at lunch, something that just can't happen on Zoom. So bringing this all together and making this happen, the Global Birth Environment Design Network, Doreen, Alison, everyone, just thank you. And I think it's really interesting the individual perspectives and proximities to birth that we all bring. For me, growing up as the daughter of a midwife in a small country town on Wiradjuri country, as Salim mentioned, I've been surrounded in a lifelong conversation about birth. It came up everywhere. How was your day around the dinner table with mum, dad, my brother Curtis, in the grocery aisle when stopped by new parents and their babies, and at school pickups for years to come down the track. And I think these conversations, both ordinary and extraordinary, show that it's an experience that's carried for years to come. My mum, who's here with me today, like every midwife and every midwife in this room, has dedicated her life to nurturing and supporting others. And I really think that's shaped my understanding of care. And yes, the medical jargon went straight over my head, but I think at the core of every conversation was the woman, the human, and how care, and through that designing for care, can and should be centred around them. And decades of research back this up. Humanised, women-centric design has consistently been shown to improve experiences, outcomes and practices. Many of you in this room have devoted your careers to building this momentum of finding, and I thank you. And I feel incredibly honoured to be here and learn from you, and I also don't need to convince you of its value. So really for me, I think coming from an architectural perspective, it's not a question of why or what, but a question of how. How do we translate and transform all of this wisdom and all of this research into architecture? So in 2021, I was fortunate to be part of the architecture team, SHAC, that was tried to address this how in the design and construction of Singleton Hospital birthing suites. Marilyn Ferrer shared many great things yesterday, and one of them being the methodology and reasoning behind her pioneering approach to designing for care, the emotional design brief. And I think this project showed me how imperative it is for the emotional design brief to carry just as much weight as a functional one, especially when budgets are so tight and value management is the flavour of the month. For me, this project also revealed a gap, how something so central to human life with decades of research to support still sits at the periphery of architectural discourse and knowledge. So yes, as mentioned, I then continued this exploration through my design-based thesis, Womble Birthplace. I don't have too much time to go through it today, but it is at the exhibition and I'm happy to talk about it at any time. But what it really touched on was the consequences of a centralised hospital system, and it challenged this tyranny of distance, the long country roads, the displacement from communities for extended periods of time that an ever-growing number of women birthing in rural and regional Australia face today. So turning to both research and precedent, I looked for a response where medical brief, the modularisation, the grid, the circulation, the equipment, almost overlaid and camouflaged with a place and an experience-based approach. The winding motif of the Womble River, which connects and is central to many of these communities within this health district. The rammed earth from these communities are all taken to site. These spaces that honour and amplify birth through the continuum of birth, right from antenatal to postnatal care. And we all understand the propelling power of precedent. In fact, architecture is a living dialogue with its past, shaped by precedent. And we know that visual precedent is powerful, yes, for architects, but also for societal accessibility and retention of information. Yet in an age where visual precedent is instantly and universally accessible for housing, schools, cultural buildings, and these typologies for architecture, access to humanised birth environment design precedent remains disproportionate to A, the amount of research that is out there, and B, the space's universal impact, which I just think is funny because the projects, the exemplary case studies of women-centred design do exist. So in 2024, I was honoured to receive a Byera Hadley Travelling Scholarship award by the New South Wales Architects Registration Board for my project, Birthspace, Rebirth. The goal was really simple, and it was a retelling of humanised birth environment design through examples. It wasn't creating anything new, it was just retelling and relaying this information that's there for us. Linking decades of research, much of it produced by the people in this room, to architectural examples that are visible, tangible, and ready to propel this practice forward. And I think my scholarship aligns closely, but also barely skims the surface of the mission of the Global Birth Environment Design Network and the incredible work the team has done in gathering, synthesising and mobilising knowledge to transform birth spaces. But I do think that this shared vision says a lot. It tells us that there is a gap here in design and also an opportunity and a responsibility for us to improve. So this time last year, actually, I visited 12 of many worldwide empowering, human-centric, exemplary case studies. I got the chance to experience these spaces, to listen to both the midwives and architects, and begin to appreciate the cultural contexts that shape them. And for me, it was one of the most rewarding experiences. So today, I want to share with you some of these learnings and observations. Rather than talking to you case study by case study, I want to take you through this continuum of birth spaces, the birthscape, as Marta talked to, that intertwine and layer together to, again, honour and amplify someone's birth experience. And yes, the aim is not to critique, but to exemplify, to present one of many tangible ideas and possibilities. So first, let us zoom out. We know that through bonding and binding theory, as Marilyn touched on, our bondings, our associations with place, how we feel within them is so important. And in many cultures, not all, the hospital has long stood as the emblem of emergency and illness. So, across all birthing typologies, case studies actively seek to subvert these medical associations and restoring it as a physiological event. Freestanding birth centres such as Delphi's, Winterthur, Terra Alta, and also the prototype room for birth and senses, were removed physically from the hospital site, adopted a residential scale, integrated uniquely with the context and the community's urban fabric. Alongside settings, the Abbey Birth Centre and Margarita Birth Centre carefully negotiated this proximity and identity with a hospital site, using new scales, geometries, entry sequences to disassociate. Meanwhile, case studies integrated within a hospital carefully thought about how we can craft entry and thresholds and transitions of atmospheric shifts to create almost a setting within a setting. And for many, a woman's first experience or first interaction with birth is often months prior. In Australia, for instance, there's approximately 10 touch points between women and their birth team. And if we look to the continuity of care model developed and touched on yesterday by Marilyn, the evidence is there. Women are likely to experience optimised births and outcomes when relationships and trust is formed with midwives and their team. So for architecture, I think the opportunity is there too to mirror this best practice, to design spaces that build trust and familiarity right from when women and place first meet. In many case studies I've visited, like went at the Terra Alta, Delphi's Margarita Birth Centre, a multidisciplinary team of specialists, communal activities, all shared the same walls and were under the same roof. Design-wise, these spaces were different in functions, but mirrored lessons we know from Birthspaces. Curved spaces, real materiality, light, flexibility, nature, and this type of master planning deliberately overlapped and blurred the lines between stages of care. It meant that women were engaging with the location, with the site, its team and other mothers long before birth, all building trust and familiarity. And the Budset, Fear Cascade and many other bodies of research all talk to, as we've spoken about, how labour often slows when women present to the hospital at the time of labour and birth, a body's natural rhythm interrupted by the unfamiliar and the clinical. And I think also what we learned about yesterday from James about light, not to mention, I was thinking about it last night, the after-hours emergency entry that I'm sure too many women experience when they have to labour at night, and that's when most people labour. So anyway, side note. So to counter this, many case studies created arrival spaces that felt instantly welcoming and familiar. Again, residential scale, a garden path, a bench seats, no signs, no sirens. One of my favourites, the entry to the Reuben Maternity Centre, can be seen from all angles and all prospect points within this hospital's big atrium space. And that's not due to large signage as such, but a vibrant and celebratory mosaic, no pastel colours. And I think in a hospital setting that is so multilingual and in such a diverse society as London, I don't think that visual wayfinding or welcoming can get much better than that. And inside, waiting areas that didn't just need to be holding zones, instructing women to wait your turn, but can be shared, transient human spaces, pram parking, generous seating, art, activities, baby change tables, kitchens, the list goes on. All thoughtful details that really set the tone. And moving along this continuum of spaces, in particular in a hospital's context, the assessment room or triage space, a woman's first intimate interaction in a hospital setting. In Australia, many of these spaces, I think, remain overtly clinical and surveyed, from which we know has been echoed over the last few days as so counterintuitive. But case studies here, again, really reimagined these spaces through the lens of birth design. We see furniture cues for conversation between staff, parents, and families. We see the bed orientation and screening to protect a woman. We see furnishings, we see kids' areas, we see home-like, we see lighting, so many interplaying design considerations there. And then research also shows that the checkpoints or cues for triage itself can make a woman feel stalled or held back. And to counter this, some of the case studies removed it altogether, inviting women straight into their birth room and aiding this continuous labour. And then we have this zone of moving between the entry and the birth space, corridors and thresholds, this in-between zone. And we know that can either hinder or help the flow of labour, synonymous with long, busy, clustered corridors, the long time emblem of hospitals. Many of these case studies flipped this narrative, turning them into supportive ancillary spaces, curved walls to promote flow and move of labour, children's play areas, milling zones, niches for private conversations, ways to move medical equipment out of the line of sight, and I mean a walking track outside past a deer sanctuary. Like, circulation doesn't get much better than that. Research by Nicoletta and others also goes further, showing how corridors can act as extensions of the birth room, a gentle transition from public to private. Their size, orientation, views in, curtaining, screening, heights, all seeming to create this threshold between the inner and outer sanctum. The use of rooms, the setback doors, screening, all of these important factors. So we've arrived at the birth room. What immediate space, I wonder, comes to mind for you all? What do you see? What do you hear? What temperature is it? There's so many design factors to consider. I think Deb noted over 60 in her presentation on Saturday. But so instead of listing this so many, I want to talk to almost an umbrella of themes that I think many of the factors work towards achieving. And these are privacy, autonomy, familiarity and trust, safety and support. Leading on from the corridor and continuing on this idea of privacy, in the birth room, it's almost acting as this two-sided funnel, keeping what's inside in and the noise and the distractions of the outside out, and signalling to women that they can express themselves freely and without inhibition. So concurrently, there is framed windows and not expansive views, thick clay walls softening the sound at the room for birth and sensors by Unka. There's layered of grassed area, then a screen, then a courtyard, then a blind, and then another blind at the Abbey Birth Centre, and that threshold between the public pathway and the window of the birth centre. What else is there? There's the sound of crashing waves by Esben, protecting the sound of women at the height of labour. There's the room within a room of Noeba Bellin from Marta and Angela, all of these ideas. And while all individuals, I think case studies really presented a lot of similarities in the privacy and their layout. So this idea of thresholds and almost buffering between birth zones, this idea both in sound and also in physical proximity, partners zones and communal zones nearby. And then I've lost my point. Oh, here we go. Inside the birth room, midwives described women instinctively seeking protected nooks, bound spaces, corners, spaces around furniture, and as Davis touched on this idea of prospect refuge theory yesterday, our intrinsic desire to be able to survey our surroundings while feeling comfortable with our level of boundness, our protection. And I think these rooms all really achieved that. Autonomy in birth is more than clinical decision making. It's about how women can exercise jurisdiction over her space, how she can move, how she can choose, and how she can express herself freely. So across these case studies, architecture didn't limit, it gave control to the women through choice of movement and also choice of her surroundings. Flexible spaces and furniture were designed with multiple postures integrated and cues promoted, but not forced. Other factors, including lighting and temperature, ventilation, were all adjustable, and a woman could attune to what she wanted. In Denmark, women and partners in Esmond's project, women and partners had the ability to select their scenery, familiar, local, meaningful, and interviews revealed how this simplicity of choice was such a key driver in the comfort and the success of the project. So together, these moves potentially support this ascension of autonomy rather than the cascade of intervention we so often hear about. And architecture, in its sense, becomes this quiet advocate, saying this is your space, you are in control. And then this idea of deep sense of familiarity, not just this looks like a bedroom, therefore it's home-like, but this embodiment of a space that a woman can quickly recognise and orientate themselves within. And it isn't just the architects contributing to this trust and this familiarity. Midwives, we know, become the daily designers, softening these spaces. So many of which we've touched on the last few days, and these subconscious associations, materiality, the touch, the temperature, the texture, the cues, the light, the circadian rhythms, indirect, soft, guiding, gradients. The artefacts of home and not of hospitals and medical settings, of the person, of the spaces to hold them. And these factors, layered and intertwined, I think embody this sense of the genius loci, the spirit of place. All were working to remove subconscious associations. And I also think there's a really interesting conversation about the richness and difference in these approaches. As we touched on yesterday, Esben, the sensory birth room and cloaking this space with sensory art that captures both the scene and the sounds that are deeply familiar to the families, not a beach in Hawaii. Or, on the other hand, the room of birth and senses, which I'm really excited to hear about from Anka, which is this womb-like shape that served as a metaphor for birth itself, and was considered so much of a sanctum that the community actually named it the Woman's Chapel, which I think is really special and incredibly telling. And as architects, we have the medical dimensions down to an absolute millimetre. We know the sweep paths of beds, we know the dimensions of every piece of equipment. And in fact, there's an entire architectural movement around, there's this entire architectural movement around universal human dimension, around a man, may I add, do we as architects know the dimension of women giving labour? Advocating that architecture has that responsibility to not only support this, is the case studies of Nueva Berlin and the Room for Birth and Senses, which really guide and build around the dimensions and the dance of labour. I think that was really special to see and learn from. Case studies also reframed safety from design for the not just in case to proactively supporting physiological labour by overlapping layers of humanised design considerations. And these considerations also extend to others there to support we got an idea from Davis yesterday about the ethnographical study of who can be in that space, how many, how do they use that space, how do they interact with the women, which was a really great study to read. And I think it leads to this idea of to invite the partners, and midwives obviously, but talking to partners, to invite the partners to lean in and not just sit on the periphery. Double beds for shared movement, spaces to support, spaces to balance this boundness but still allow for midwives support and women, not just in the birth room, but like let's also talk about the bathroom and how small and pokey those spaces can be. And how are you fitting 3-4 people in a small bathroom while a woman's in labour in a shower for 4-5 hours? I think that's something that we can really improve on. And then, of course, the camouflaging of medical artefacts and the emergency response, which can be hidden to the untrained eye. Antibacterial qualities in the Moroccan lime render. Creative uses of joinery, folded away beds, which was just awesome. And then, of course, the reassurance for some that medical support is nearby if required. While birth may be the height and this climactic point in the maternity journey, what follows, the postnatal period, as Latif showed us yesterday, is a time that's equally intense of emotion, of connection, of navigation, and architecture must do more than just support recovery. It must hold space for joy, for fatigue, for bonding, and sometimes for grief. I think many case studies framed this postnatal room as a continuum of the birth experience and not a departure from it. Familiar materials, architectural expressions, boundness and private spaces. Double beds were a recurring feature, subtle yet radical, acknowledging both parents as participants, both in birth centres but also in hospital settings. We've got furniture that actually supports and encourages staying and dwelling, and then tiny details like a stool that was made by the local carpenter to assist women in breastfeeding off the side of the bed. These really small moments that I think make a really big difference. And across projects, postnatal spaces also balance this level of privacy and interaction. On one hand, we've got the private bound bedroom offering a sanctuary for parents to bond with their newborn, but on the other hand, we've got more open communal spaces that became really important social anchors. These zones were typically situated at the intersection between staff and birth suites, like this heart, this centre of a home. In several case studies, they were designed quite literally around the kitchen. So architects like Gunny at Terra Alta talked about this ritual of care, about cooking and also about community eating. And it's not just a place to eat. They allowed for stories, they allowed for casual conversations between midwives and new families and new mothers to new mothers, like just so important. And then we also saw that the ergonomics of design of these spaces was really generous as well. Oops. For instance, these baskets to hold the newborns were built as part of the joinery. It wasn't an afterthought. And these chairs can move and adapt and change to suit the environment. These baskets and these chairs are also at the height of breastfeeding, like just so small but so radical. And then this idea of 2 kitchens. So there's a kitchen for you to prepare your food that you want to eat at Terra Alta, but then there's also the kitchen for the staff to prepare a meal if you want as well. So we've got options that women again can choose what she wants. And then we've also got flexible spaces for communal activities and different seating zones to sort of house different levels of interactions and visitors. By documenting and sharing these positive exemplars, the aim, as I said, is not to critique but to exemplify and to present tangible ideas and possibilities of inspiration, linking research to practice. And I hope that these images and observations help to disrupt and challenge the status quo and work towards setting a new benchmark for birth environment design. And also extend architectural focus of designing out fear, as research tells us, past the birth suite itself. Because this continuum of space paints a completely different picture to this one. So again, I want to thank you to those whose wisdom and findings have become the pillar of why Birthspace matters and what must be done. And to the midwives, the daily designers, transforming and protected women, and who I came to learn that are usually the key drivers and the key forces behind these projects. And then as well to the architects and designers and artists here, teaching me how we can honour and amplify these spaces, the birth experience, and advocate through empathy. Thank you.